All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is Mr. Kosick speaking to you. We're going to start our unit on social patterns and trends, and I think the best way to do that is to start by looking at demographics, which I'm sure you all remember from grade 9 geography. So obviously, just if we don't totally remember, we might want to explain it a little bit. So demography is when we look at the use of human populations and we study the effect that this has on the way we make decisions in our society. So it gives us a lot of useful data. So think of things like the census in Canada. So we would use this type of information to predict population and growth. So this is something that we can use to make decisions. So we can say, well, do we need more hospitals? Do we need more schools? Do we need more senior citizen centers? Do we need more parks? Do we need different things? Do we need to change the number of immigrants that we let into Canada because the population is growing too much? So these are the kind of things that demographers would do, and they would look at the data that is available to them based on population size and how that influences our society. Think of things like also, if you remember the Arab Spring, you look at places around the world where the population was such that more than half the population was under age of 25. So this created a lot of different problems, and because these young people didn't have jobs, they didn't have futures, they didn't have careers, they didn't have anything that they were looking forward to. So they took the only sort of political recourse they could, and they revolted against the government. This is obviously something we don't really want to see in Canada, so we are trying to avoid these types of problems. Now, when we study demography and we look at different groups within Canadian society, we tend to break things down and we sort of compartmentalize them so it makes sense. So one of the easiest ways to organize them is we have these different groups. We call them, these are demographic eras, and then we subdivide them into subgroups, or we have sort of nicknames for them. The first one, and probably the most influential one, would be the baby boom. So following World War II, when the soldiers came home, many of them started families. You have this massive spike in Canadian population. So to subdivide this, we go into boomers. These are the groups that are born from, officially from 46 to 66. This is the entire baby boomer generation. You have groups like yuppies. Yuppies, that stands for Young Urban Professionals. You also have dinks, which is a yuppie subgroup. This is a dual income, no kids group. So they're a slightly different variation. They have different things and they have different ways that they contribute to society as opposed to yuppies. And then you have the Generation X. Gen Xers are usually born from 1960 to 1966. Now, it's important to remember when you're looking at these different demographic eras and these subgroups that not everybody agrees on this. So we're going with the most generally agreed upon names and time frames, but there's some variance. So you'll find some different things that will tell you something different. Following the baby boom, there's a very small group that's called the baby bust, which admittedly not a great name, but this is a fairly small group, and it comes between two fairly large groups. So we distinguish it a little bit separately. And to tell you sort of how small it is, I couldn't even find an image for it. So these are the groups that fall between the declining birth period of 67 to 79. Then you've got the echo boom. The echo boom has also more recently been known as millennials. This is anyone from the 1980 to 1995 approximate range. This is a very large demographic cohort as well. It represents a fairly substantial chunk of Canada's population. So in that you have Generation Y, as well as the echo kids, and the puppies, which would be the children of the yuppies. So any of these groups, we tend to think of them as born between 1980 to 1995. Following that, we now have this unnamed sort of generational cohort. We don't really know what to call this group. Generation Z, Millennium Kids, and we're not totally sure we really like any of these names, but these are the groups from 1996 to present day. We don't really know what to call these people. So we're trying to figure out how to identify them, and again, maybe it's not necessarily about labeling or sort of identifying them by any particular factor, but we like this as a compartmentalization and a way to organize lots of data. So I don't know, maybe you can come up with a good name for this group, because generally social scientists and psychologists and demographers haven't been able to do that yet. But this is what we're going to be looking at when we look at demographic data. So we look at things like the demographic transition, or we look at population pyramids. Again, this goes back to your grade 9 geography. But this is going to be very useful in looking at the way that these groups of people influence our society and the things that our society does to shape around them. So that's what we're going to be looking at for most of this next unit of study. Hopefully that helped you get some insight into the basics in terms of introduction to demography. I'll be trying to make some more videos and some more info for you guys as soon as I can, and hopefully this one worked out a bit for you.